So I'm a longtime Sony fanboy. I've had Sony cameras ever since 2016. That's when I bought a Sony NEX camera. I don't even remember what model it was. And I was really blown away with how compact and fun that camera was to shoot with. Then fast forward a few years, I had messed with the Lumix G7, the GH4. I ended up with the Sony A7R2. Then I had the A7R3, the A7 III, and then more recently I bought the Sony A7 IV and the FX30. And I've shot so many YouTube videos using the FX30 and the A7 IV, and I've really loved using both of those cameras. But after shooting a lot more content recently and looking at some of the features of the Lumix S5IIX, I decided it was time to give that camera a try, and after trying it, I've decided to switch all my camera gear over to Lumix. So in this video, we're going to talk about a few of the features that the S5IIX has that brought me over to this side from Sony, and I'm also going to talk about a few things that I think Sony does a little bit better in case you're trying to decide if you should switch from Sony over to Lumix. The first feature is the Open Gate 6K, and what I love about the 6K Open Gate shooting is you use the whole sensor, so it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is perfect if you want to crop in for vertical 16:9 or if you want to do horizontal 16:9. That lets you make two versions of your content a lot easier because you're shooting so much more resolution on the camera and such a wider area as well. And you're able to be really careful with the way you frame things up. And you're able to make sure that you're going to be in the vertical frame and you're also going to be in the horizontal frame exactly where you need to be by using the different markers that Lumix gives you in their menus. The next thing I love about the Lumix cameras is the in-body image stabilization. And the S5IIX just gives you really good handheld footage. The Sonys always did fine, but with the S5IIX, I actually feel like I'm able to get more stable footage than ever, especially if I just want to get a quick handheld B-roll shot. A lot of times on the Sony camera, there would be micro jitters, or I just want to be quite happy with how it looks, and I'd have to stabilize it in post, and then it's still kind of weird. But with the S5IIX, I found I'm able to get really good handheld footage. The next feature that brought me over is the SSD recording. Now, with the Sony cameras, you can shoot in either CF Express Type A or in SDXC formats. And on the Lumix camera, you do have two SDXC slots built in, but you can also shoot externally using USB SSDs, which is really handy because right now I'm actually using some of the SanDisk Pro blades in the Condor Blue handle. I've just got it mounted directly on the camera. This is really nice because you can shoot in super high data rates and be able to capture it all just fine with the SSD, and then you're also able to quickly offload your footage from the SSD. Not to mention SSDs are way more affordable than SD cards are in the same capacities, and they don't even make fast SD cards that go up to a terabyte. So you're able to get a terabyte Pro blade, stick it in the Condor Blue handle, and then mount it directly to your camera cage, and you're shooting at a very high bit rate and very high quality while also giving yourself super easy file transfers because of that handle. The handle has a USB-C port on it, so you just plug it directly into the camera, and then you can plug it directly into your computer and either edit off of it or just transfer the footage to whatever other device you need to. Absolutely love the USB recording on the S5IIX. Finally, the last thing I love is just the look that I get out of this camera. The videos just look super crisp and lifelike, and I think part of that is the 6K, but also the color science that Panasonic has is fantastic. And I just feel like the camera does a really good job at making a lifelike image, whether I'm shooting B-roll of products or if I'm shooting talking head segments like this. All the video shots just look so crisp and clean. Also, in terms of image quality, there's just very little noise on the S5IIX. When I was shooting a lot with my FX30, I just found that there was a lot of noise going on in the background, even when I was shooting at a base ISO. And that just started getting on my nerves when I was seeing this footage that should look super clean and crispy. I had a ton of the noise in the background. I know you can run denoisers and other plugins, but I really like to have a fast and simple workflow. So having a camera like the S5IIX that just puts out really clean image quality, it just saves a lot of time in post. Another thing I really love about the S5IIX is the fact that it has the built-in fan, so there's no issues with overheating. And I was able to get pretty good results with the A7 IV, but there would be times when it would just randomly shut off on me for no reason while I was filming. That would really get on my nerves because I wanted that full frame look. But I was just having so many issues with reliability, I never wanted to film with the A7 IV because I was afraid I was just going to be dealing with the camera shutting off on me over and over and over. So that made me ultimately stop using it for talking head segments of videos like this. Let's talk about a couple issues with the Lumix S5IIX. The first issue is they definitely improved the autofocus over past versions of the cameras, but it's definitely not as fast as the Sony autofocus or as accurate. There's times where I'll be reviewing my footage and I'll see it just pulses in and out on my face a little bit. Or even like right now, I'll watch and it'll decide to change from my face to my hands or something like that. Sony just does such a great job at locking on exactly what you want the footage to be focused on. I think with the S5IIX, you just have to mess with the settings a little bit more, get used to all the different focusing modes, which I'm just not quite there yet. The next thing that bothers me about this camera, and I don't see too many people talking about this, whenever you half press the shutter to do autofocus single, you're going to find that it'll actually boost your ISO or lower your ISO to get the camera to what it determines to be correct exposure. And this has something to do with the way that their autofocus system works. The exposure needs to be correct in the eyes of the camera in order to lock on. So that can be really confusing when you have the exposure looking exactly how you want, then you half press the shutter, it changes the exposure, and then you capture the image. Now it only does this as long as the shutter is half pressed. So if you're just focusing on one shot in video doing a half press, it'll go back to normal in a second. But with the photo mode, this can be really confusing. The last issue I have with the S5IIX is the third-party lens support. And this is something that's a little strange at this time because the L Mount has been out for a few years, and both Leica, Panasonic, and also Sigma make lenses for this mount. But I've just found that there's not quite as many lens choices out on the market yet because the L Mount is newer than the Sony E Mount. So Sony just has more third-party companies making really good lenses, and that also drives the price of the used market down as well. So all the Panasonic native lenses and all the other L mount lenses are still a little bit more expensive than a lot of their Sony counterparts, but this should level out over time. So that is a slight con to switching over to the L mount system. So those are my thoughts on the Lumix S5IIX and why I'm switching over from Sony to the S5IIX. I think the main features that I wish Sony would adopt is first and foremost the OpenGate 6K and the USB-C recording. If they had those two features, I would probably have considered sticking with Sony or buying a new camera from them. But for this time, I'm going to mostly be shooting on the S5IIX. I'm not going to buy a second Lumix camera yet, so I'm going to keep my A7 IV, use that as my B camera, but it'll be really interesting to see what Sony comes out with next to see if they're able to catch up with Panasonic and some of these new features they've come out with. I'm not saying one camera brand is better or worse than the other. There's just certain features that fit my workflow a little bit better right now. That's why the S5IIX is my new choice. If you're interested in any of the gear I used to make this video, I have links in the description below. If you have any other questions or thoughts about changing systems or the S5IIX or the Sony A7 IV, FX30, or any of the other cameras, leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer them. Like this video, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming content.